these meetings. And Lena and I are his sidekicks for today. Hugo Corona Hernández is still a PhD student from my team, but not for long, for just a few weeks probably, because he already submitted his PhD thesis, which has to do with language in schizophrenia, especially looking into hallucinations and linguistic deviations there. And it's very nice to see that Hugo has grown so much and now see him really functioning at postdoc level and taking the lead in this discourse meeting. He also took the lead on our consortium paper that we wrote last year on the Lawrence workshop. And that will also be the topic for today. So that's what Hugo will guide you through. As for myself, I'm a psychiatrist at UMC Groningen in the Netherlands, where Hugo is also post. And together with others, we're looking into language deviations in schizophrenia, which was also the topic of my PhD project many years ago. I don't think Lena actually needs an introduction, but Sonny, you want to do it anyway, right?
Oh, sure. I think, maybe there's a couple names I haven't really seen here before. So Dr. Lena Palaniyappan works with patients and families experiencing early stages of severe mental illnesses, such as psychosis. He's an inaugural director of the Center for Youth Mental Health at the Douglas Institute at McGill University and holds the Bourgeois Chair in Developmental Disorders at the McGill University. And his research group, Neuroimaging and Mental Illnesses in Youth, has its base at two Canadian medical schools, one at the Robarts Research Institute at the School of Medicine in Western University in Ontario, and the other one at McGill. I think the major emphasis of Lena's work is to modify the pathways that lead to poor long-term outcomes in individuals with serious mental disorders that often start in adolescence. And relevant to today's talk, he convenes Discourse in Psychosis, our international research consortium with 210 interdisciplinary members, all interested in the domains of language in psychotic disorders, which I think has been an amazing achievement and one that I'm really excited to continue to be a part of. So I think before we launch into Hugo's and Iris and Lena's talk for today, I just wanted to remind everyone again about our upcoming satellite meeting in Pavia, Italy. Here, I'm just about to pull up and share the flyer once again. Let's see. Yes. So, as we did last year, we are planning to hold a satellite meeting in tandem with SIRS, which will be in Florence this year in April. So just after SIRS is completed, so that I believe this is the day after, on Monday, April 8th, we will be meeting in Pavia, Italy. And we're very grateful to be hosted by our colleagues there, Valentina Bambini and some of her colleagues. I see Chiara here today. And we're really looking forward to a fantastic program where we will be learning a little bit more about the work that's been ongoing in Italy, and also sharing updates and current collaborations and our working groups work on the discourse side. There will also be a number of posters. So I think we're expecting 7 posters, I believe it is, from our Italian colleagues, and then 7 posters among the discourse members. And in terms of the talks, we're planning to organize that based on some of the working groups that we have set up currently. And I believe, we're still, I think we're planning maybe early next year to start working that out in a little bit more detail. So perhaps, if you're not in a working group yet, perhaps look to see if you can be involved. And that leadership in the working group should be reaching out to try to put something together. And yes, I'm looking. Elena, do you know, I know there's at least one discourse related symposium at SIRS this year as well. Do you know of more?
There's going to be two, at least. I haven't heard about Wolfram's proposal yet, but the two, one is going to be led by Isaac Fratkin, who's doing theoretical mechanistic model works. And then the other one by yourself, Sunny. So there'll be two very nice symposia. The boring part of that is going to be same moderator for both, which is me. But but we'll have other proposals coming to Pavia, I hope.
Yes, that's right. Oh, and I see a question about registration for the satellite symposium. Actually, Betsy, I think I saw you join, or Lena. Do you guys have the latest update on that?
Betsy, maybe. I don't think we have set up something. We're waiting for the first week of January meeting for sending an email around. Betsy, is there any different news that you have?
Amelie, that's correct. We're going to send out more information on the Discourse newsletter, and there'll be plenty of communication. We're just waiting to finalize some stuff in January, and then we'll send a wide invitation and information to the whole consortium group.
Yeah, so you haven't missed anything. Yes, but we wanted everybody to save the date and to try to plan to come if you're able to. Okay, so great. I think without further ado, Lena, unless there's some other announcements we should begin with, no. So then I'll let Hugo take it away.
Yes, thank you. Just a small question. We have 1.5 hours, right?
Yes.
So our presentation can last like roughly 45 minutes, something like that, maybe, or?
Yeah, 45 to an hour. I think an hour would be our boundary.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I will start sharing my screen. We tried this before, so you all should be able to see the presentation. Are you all looking at the first slide with the title?
Looks good.
Okay. Well, thank you all for attending this online meeting hosted by the Discourse in Psychosis group. And today I'm really happy to be able to present along with Dr. Sommer and Dr. Palaniyappan. So the ideas that we pulled together during the Lawrence workshop 1 year ago, and then that we condensed in a consensus paper, and also how these ideas have really transformed, or at least just follow to actual multi-regional studies. So sometimes inside one country, sometimes across country, on speech and language in psychosis. And about that, Dr. Lena and Dr. Sommer will lead the presentation. So I will mainly focus on the workshop and the paper. And that's the first part, actually, of this talk, as you can see here. So again, I will briefly share with you a bit about the Lawrence workshop, in which we saw these ideas born or being discussed, and then written down and published in a special issue in Schizophrenia Bulletin. Then Dr. Lena and Dr. Sommer will share with you about ongoing projects about speech and language in psychosis. And then by the end of the presentation, I really hope we can enjoy and challenge our own knowledge and maybe even beliefs about all these lines of research, brainstorming and discussing emerging or quite critical points in moving forward all these studies and getting a better understanding about language and psychosis. So first of all, let me briefly share with you a bit of the background of the Lawrence. So in 2022, we were already really happy because it was announced that Dr. Sommer was selected as a distinguished Lawrence Fellow. And with this, she was able to host the Lawrence workshop at the Leiden University by the end of 2022. And of course, this was related to NLP and automatic language analysis in order to fulfill, maybe, hopefully, in the near future, different clinical actions, which I will introduce later. So this is the background. But this was really fundamental because otherwise all this group of people who came together might actually have not been able to get together to discuss all these ideas and then write down the paper and then eventually start leading all these ongoing and amazing projects that we are witnessing these days. So in the first week of November 2022, we were having, of course, nice food and nice drinks, enjoying our company by the end of each day, as you can see in these photos, either in a nice restaurant or on boarding small boat in the canals in Leiden. But of course, all of this occurred after intense and really long days of work, as you can see on the photos of the left. So during the workshop, we had presentations about designated topics. We have panel discussions. We have working groups. It was really awesome. And by the end of the day, we were just trying to figure out, making sense out of all the, like, you know, just constructing something coherent and kind of a handle of concepts and ideas and arguments and counter arguments to try to summarize all the points that were being discussed during these 5 days full of a lot of brainstorming and theoretical debates, etc., etc. And then we were able to arrive at the consensus. And this consensus was published with the title Natural Language Processing Markers for Psychosis and Other Psychiatric Disorders in this special issue in Schizophrenia Bulletin. And what I would like to try to do today is to highlight the main messages of this consensus paper, which of course gravitated around the idea that we really are working together because we want to develop these NLP markers for psychiatric disorders. And for that, in this consensus paper, we focus, for instance, in the following priorities, which are, for instance, to start having a definition of what these NLP markers for psychiatric disorders are, what kind of roles might they play, which kind of clinical actions they might be helpful to with, how these NLP markers should go along with mechanistic research. So really trying to disentangle what the underlying mechanisms, the neurobiology, the neurocognitive mechanisms of language and psychosis are, and how these relate to these NLP markers. And of course, imagining all of this to really make use of these NLP markers in, at that moment, still theoretical clinical decision support systems, keeping in mind that all of this is permeated by ethical challenges. And a brief disclaimer, of course, I am not an expert on all of this. So I will just try to highlight the ideas of the paper. And of course, if you have any burning question, I would be glad to discuss to the extent I can during the discussion part of the presentation. Starting right now, maybe, with the ethical challenges. And of course, I must stress that these by any means are not all the ethical challenges related to developing NLP markers. These are just some of the challenges that we mentioned in this consensus paper. And I can really say, because I've heard this in really many awesome meetings with just leaders in the field, one of these points deserves a lot of hours of discussion, and by no means I pretend to do that. So again, I'm here just showing that, for instance, acceptability is something we really need to keep in mind, because if we are developing NLP markers that might be used in clinical decision support systems, but in the end there is no acceptability by, for instance, different stakeholders such as patients or clinicians and so on, then we might just raise the question, what then we should do in order to make them acceptable. So it is really critical. So we are really developing something that, or we're trying to develop something that on the one hand can inform us about the, for instance, etiology of psychosis and neurobiology and underlying mechanisms of language. But on the other hand, I don't know if a product is the appropriate word, but something that we can really use, or clinicians and patients can really use, or other stakeholders can use on a daily basis in order really to improve the life quality of people, and maybe, for instance, facilitate the providing care in clinical settings. So it's really a paramount component of developing NLP markers. And of course, along with this, come this discussion about data protection and the development or the creation of international and national legislations or laws in order to guarantee the privacy of all the data that we are gathering. Another point is that we don't want, or ideally one of the scenarios is that we want NLP markers that we can explain. So explainability can be here thought to be also dimensional, in the sense that this explainability can be from the angle of, for instance, the algorithm itself, so mathematically or computationally, but we also want to link it to these underlying mechanisms maybe. So these NLP measures should be correlated with, for instance, neural measures, or with behavioral variables and other important characteristics. And of course, linguistic explainability is also fundamental. For instance, coherence is quite well phenomenon studied in linguistics. And if, for instance, we think about developing an NLP marker that we try to link with coherence, then this explainability ideally should also kind of be consistent or aligning with maybe the theory about coherence from the linguistic point of view. And again, this is just a short list of ethical challenges, but if we think about, for instance, the misuse of these NLP markers, to our mind can come the idea of maybe discrimination. And by discrimination, maybe in this sense, it is important to note that maybe this discrimination often might occur involuntarily, in the sense that, for instance, this discrimination might be the result of a bias in recruiting certain type of populations which have certain type of characteristics in their linguistic variant, etc., etc. And if you have an NLP marker which was developed using all these characteristics and all these parameters, and then you use it in a setting in which your population or your individuals manifest different characteristics, then maybe the algorithm in a way was trained or developed just not being informed by all this information of all these other populations, and then it will be a misuse of this NLP marker if you are trying to provide care for this other population with these other characteristics. And this can come with potential harms, for instance, missing a relapse or not being able to predict the onset of an illness, etc., etc. And another really important thing is to try to define an NLP marker. And in this consensus paper, we highlighted these 4 characteristics. So that it should be something that holds quantifiable measures of human language production. And we acknowledge that human language production can be orally, such as with speech, or with, for instance, our limbs, such as with sign languages. It can also be by, for instance, text. So all of this is embraced during this NLP marker, but all of this should be quantifiable in a way, and ideally digitally acquired. So by means of audio recorders or smartphones or any other device that then can be linked to software that can compute and derive measures using NLP or other techniques. And importantly, all of these measures are permeated and are really influenced by different biological, neurocognitive, and social processes. So in the paper, we also highlighted that we really need to work hard to find a way to account for all of these possible factors and try to distinguish which are the which is the part of the signal, or which are really the characteristics at the core of, for instance, psychosis, and how this marker reflects that, or a given marker, NLP marker, might reflect that. And having these quantified measures, which were digitally acquired and computationally derived, and that reflect all these biological, neurocognitive, and social processes, we said in the paper, might have 2 potential roles. On the one hand, we can use them descriptively, and on the other hand, we might try to use them mechanistically. And so far, most of the previous research has been used or tried to develop these NLP markers to use them descriptively, such as, for instance, grouping individuals or stratifying individuals for studies. On the other hand, if at some point we were able to use these NLP markers mechanistically, the idea would be that we will really be at the point in which we will be able to say, yes, this is the NLP marker X, and this NLP marker X has been linked with, for instance, these connectivity measures, brain connectivity measures, or has been linked with these neurobiological processes or mechanisms. And in a way, that would really allow us to be confident that changes that we will, or differences that we will find in this NLP marker between populations. So for instance, patients or individuals with psychosis and healthy controls would really be signaling that the etiology of psychosis is there. while controlling for all of these other biological and neurocognitive and social processes. And you can imagine trying to apply all of this in different situations. And we suggested in the paper that these 10 clinical priorities could be one of the most often referred in previous studies. And if we start looking from the left of this slide, for instance, we can think about these cases in which clinicians and patients are in the need of early detection and the prediction of the onset of a new illness. So for instance, you can have an individual and an NLP marker could be developed to try to detect these early warning signs so that this individual at the point before of being at a high risk could be identified and differentiated from all of those who are not at-risk individuals. But if, for instance, this phase is missed, and then you are presented with an individual who is at a high risk of developing a psychiatric disorder, then maybe you will need to have an algorithm, an NLP marker that might help you to predict the onset of the disease, and so on and so on. So if we keep moving to the right, then we'll see the scenario when you already have an individual needing a diagnosis, and then the NLP marker, an NLP marker might be developed to try to really differentiate between diagnosis. And if you already arrive at a diagnosis, maybe you can also have an NLP marker, which might be useful in trying to determine which is the best optimal treatment for this individual and what the prognosis for this individual are. And then you can also have NLP markers to try to assess the symptoms, for instance, remotely, and also the effects of the treatment. And these effects might be also adverse effects, but also the benefits of the treatment. And you can also use an NLP marker in order to try to predict relapse. And across all of these situations, events or outcomes such as suicidality and aggression can also occur. And we could also try to develop, and it has been attempted, tried to develop NLP markers to predict suicidal ideation, for instance, or aggression. And at the moment, and that's what we highlighted in the consensus paper, there is research done for all the clinical actions that I already mentioned. But what we are really figuring out, along with the computational part and the linguistic part, are really the mechanisms underlying language and, for instance, psychosis, and how all of this might be linked with these NLP markers that we are digitally acquiring and computationally deriving, etc., etc. So in the consensus paper, we said that in order to be able to arrive at in order to be able to really use these NLP markers with the mechanistic role, we really need to develop these mechanistic models about, for instance, psychosis and language. And here by mechanisms, we can think about multi-level mechanisms. So it could be mechanisms at the cognitive level, it could be mechanisms at the neurobiological level, and so on and so on. And the aim is to really at some point being able to link those mechanisms with these NLP markers. And in order to do that, in the consensus paper, we said that it is really important to develop experiments in a theory-driven way, trying to account or control for developmental factors or biosocial factors or behavioral factors that have been shown to link, for instance, on the one hand with language and on the other hand with models on the etiology of psychosis. So all of these components should be integrated and linked to these computational markers or digital markers, NLP markers that we are trying to develop. And all of that was in the paper theoretical. And now I would really like to give the floor to Dr. Sommer and Dr. Lena so that they explain you how all these ideas, how all these arguments, how all these conceptualization, how all these rationale really led to these current studies about NLP markers in psychosis. So, Dr. Sommer, if you will, please.
I will take over. Yes, gladly. Thank you very much, Hugo, for summarizing the developments of the consensus paper and also updating us about the workshop in 2022 already. So one of the results was that we formed a group to write an Horizon grant, from which the first one was not awarded, but the second one was. And the name of that Horizon grant is called Trusting. It has started in July this year. And here you can see the work package leaders. I know that one of them is also attending the meeting, which is Janna de Boer. And I'm sure that most of you also know Wolfram Hinze, and probably also Britta Elvervaak and Philip Homan. Babarci Ballas is from Hungary, and he is leading the work package on health technology assessment. And Erik van der Eycken is work package leader for the communication work package. He works for GAMI and the European Patient Organization. So we had our kickoff meeting, and we're now at the time of 6 months at submitting our first deliverables. We're collaborating to see if we can come up with an application to accurately predict relapse in patients that have experienced a first psychosis. But a very important goal of us is to make it an acceptable application, not only for patients, but also for clinicians to use. And we're taking great care to respect everybody's privacy and to act according to all the different legal aspects of working with privacy sensitive data that speech is. So unfortunately, it's too early yet to say anything about real results. We don't have them yet. We're just writing up protocols, hiring good people, and that's always such so nice to do, that you can find clever PhD students and postdocs. So as to speak for my team in Groningen, it's now complete. And I know that Wolfram and Philip are also hiring really good people. And I think we'll be up and running full speed for the next 4 years. Part of it is also a randomized control trial that we will run in 6 different languages, 5 European languages, plus Turkey, because many European countries have a large minority of Turkish speaking inhabitants, and that RCT is bound to start 2025, in which we really want to test if an application to predict relapse can actually predict what it should predict, and if patients and clinicians are willing to work with it, and in the end also if it actually can be used to prevent relapse and hopefully also to improve patient outcome. Now, this is just one of the many applications that Hugo showed us for which NLP might be useful, and I see only in the field of psychosis so many other important applications. And now that we really have the opportunity to dive into one application, it's interesting to see how cross-disciplinary this field really is. So for me, my background is I'm a psychiatrist, and I was lucky to have a PhD in language in schizophrenia. So I know a little bit about language, but not enough for sure. But so many other aspects are involved, not only linguistics and psychiatry, but also legal aspects, ethics, technical aspects, AI. And it's very nice because you can learn a lot from other colleagues, but it's also very complex. And the system, it really needs to all come together. And with one discipline or one partner failing, the whole project will fail. So you really need to play chess on many different boards. And it's a nice challenge. But I do feel challenged with this project, and I'm glad that I'm a member of the Discourse consortium, so that I can use you as sparring partners, but also learn a lot from you and from other projects that are running in parallel and that I'm sure are facing very similar challenges as we are. And I think, Lena, you are one of the other projects, you know, you're also starting a project into relapse prediction, right?
That's right, Iris. Thanks for leading that on. I also wanted to say, before I start, these 3 slides, I have only 3 slides. I briefly want to introduce a project similar to what Iris did. But it's a pleasure to share this with Iris and Hugo. Iris primarily, given the long time that we worked together and the amount of work, Iris, you have led in language. So this is a privilege for me to speak with you on this. And we have very similar projects, so it's a good good instance. And with Hugo, I saw how productive, Hugo, you were in Leiden meeting. You single-handedly ran the whole meeting. So this is also a nice reflection of all the work that was done last year. So thanks for that. Iris, you mentioned challenges in doing projects like this, and there were many challenges that came out in the consensus paper as well. And I want to introduce a very specific challenge groups like ourselves in Canada face. So Canadian federal investment in research is not as big as you would expect many G7 countries to do. So we're very used to doing big projects with small amount of money. And this is one such project. We have 3 sites trying to collect similar data of predicting relapse in psychosis. It's a project called Bien Plus Kidemo. It's Mo Plus, more than words or more than just words. It's primarily, the idea is to use speech recordings in patients with psychosis, especially early episode of psychosis, first episode psychosis, and try to predict when relapse is happening, not just who is going to relapse, but when exactly the relapse is happening in the samples. And it's a large project, like I said. It involves 2 provinces, Quebec and Ontario. It's funded by the Quebec provincial funding body. It's called FRQS. And that funding was possible because of an investment from Janssen looking for innovative mental health projects. So Janssen doesn't directly fund this work, but it has given that money to the government, the ministry, and we had a competitive granting process, and we were awarded this recently. So this is a 3-year project, and you can see many. Sorry, if you go back one more minute, Hugo. It involves several partners, and the most important co-lead is Amélie Achim. She's here. Amélie is going to lead the Quebec City part of it, and she's going to collect data in Quebec City and also um, set up some of the referential theory of mind based data collection that we're doing at the baseline for the sample. And the second site is in Montreal. We're collecting both English and Francophone, Anglophone and Francophone speakers. There are clinics with around 60% Anglophone population and around 40% Anglophone population in different areas. So we are specifically recruited these early intervention clinics with distribution of different language speakers. And it involves patient partners, as you see, Astrid Baston. We have engineers like Mala Chakravarti and AI people like Guillaume Duma, who's very interested in hyperscanning as well, by the way. And we have, in Quebec City, we have pharmacists involved. And primarily the reason is we're going to focus on people who discontinue antipsychotics. And they are someone who are at higher risk of relapse. And we want to provide something that kind of meaningfully helps those people who are already at higher risk, static risk, so that speech can provide dynamic risk information on top of it. And Rita Juber, who directs the PEP clinic here, Shalini Lal, who has studied the qualitative aspects of relapse in young people quite a lot in the past. Katie Levine, who is a cognitive scientist, and she's setting up some of the protocols for digital data collection for this study. Martin Lepage, who's also a psychologist and early intervention researcher for a long period of time. Marc-André Rai, who's a psychiatrist, and he'll be leading this along with leading the clinical sample collection part of it along with Amelie in Quebec City. And Priya Subramaniam, a psychiatrist who works in London, Ontario. So we'll be collecting data from London as well. And many collaborators. You will see Alban Wappel here, who many of you know. Alban used to be a PhD student with IRIS, and he's now here with our group. Alban is going to take lead on coordinating some of the work in the Montreal site for setting it up. Next slide, Hugo. So what is this project? Why are we focused on this? So one of the things about using speech for monitoring clinical states is it's important to leverage a change from baseline. Why do I say that? Because most mental states that we monitor in clinical practice, they're not qualitatively unique. They're only quantitatively different. For example, sadness, anxiety, these are all present almost in everybody's life, but quantitative severity is what determines what a clinician does in terms of treatment change, clinical decisions like hospital admissions or extra help. So quantitative measurements are more meaningful if we have an idea about the baseline. Because if you're a clinician who knows the patient for a while, you're not going to admit a patient to the hospital just because they come in and have an atypical speech or some atypicality. You got to know, is this their baseline? Are they always atypical before you make any decisions, such as hospital admission or discharge or treatment, initiation or discontinuation? So it's important to catch that baseline, capture that very well, and use that for us to monitor how do the change happens over a period of time. And this is the major principle behind this particular project. So in a first episode team setting, we will first wait for patients to reach some kind of clinical stability. In clinical language, this is called CGI-3 or less. People are more stable at this stage, and we record the first sample of speech at that time. So we know the baseline from this. And then if you just follow up these patients, generally in a clinic without any digital markers, usually in early intervention clinics, patients come and see a clinician every month. This is kind of an average median frequency of contact in most early intervention clinics. And when you see patients every month, most of the time they're going to be fine, they're taking medication, but it's likely that sometimes you see them and before you see them next time, they had a relapse, they went into a hospital or they became unwell, you had to do something about it. So some of your contacts that you have with your patient will be preceding a relapse. Some of the contacts will not precede a relapse. There will be normal contacts with nothing happening next month. So if you collect speech samples every month when people come to you, then you can go back after 2 years and see which of those speech samples preceded relapse and which of them did not. And you can see how much change from baseline happened in each of those. And the change from baseline would be modeled in predicting relapse over time for the sample. And we also want to see if this kind of change from baseline is valid across languages and across sexes as well, males and females primarily. And one of the advantages of doing baseline change focus is lots of factors that we think as confounders between subjects are not that problematic within a subject, because the sex doesn't change between baseline and first, second, third samples in most cases. So these kind of problems that you generally have with modeling and explainability are overcome if you focus on a baseline measure and track it from there. And this is exactly what clinicians do as well. Initial assessment, they form an idea about a patient's baseline, and they use it for making clinical decisions later on. Next slide, please. In addition, we also have another new funding that we received from the FRQS, which is the Quebec provincial funding source. This is also an input, larger investment from multiple ministries within Quebec. Again, some of the investment came from Janssen. And this is really helping us to bring 3 large institutions together in Quebec: University of Montreal, McGill University, and Laval, to build a Quebec-wide mental health alliance. And part of that will be a Quebec-wide speech bank for multiple mental health problems, not just psychosis. We also want to have some routines of data collection, speech sampling from, say, PTSD, depression, any major mental problems, mental health problems that people seek help from hospital basis. So that is really starting at the moment. And some of this data that we collect for Mo Plus project will be available through this speech bank. And we're trying to think of ways in which this can be more widely available. It's very early stages of planning at the moment, but it'll come to it over time. And this is all hosted by the research center I'm affiliated with. It's Douglas Research Center. Next slide. I think that's probably, yeah, that's all I had. Thanks, Hugo, for this interlude.
This is a new project, the Delta of Language, that we'll be starting on. The starting date will be in 2024. And I think I need to come back to that later, because it's more fundamental. It's about identifying the brain states that are changed in psychosis concerning MRI together with speech from quite a mechanistic standpoint, and see if we can find a common denominator that is deviant in well, all maybe too much, but many people with psychosis, and then follow people from psychosis to remission, and also again from remission to relapse, and see how the brain, especially default mode network, is changing, and how that's associated with deviations in speech and language characteristics. And I hope to tell you more about that project in a bit, maybe in a year from now. What could be good to already announce is that we are organizing yet another workshop, again hosted in Leiden, which is very close to the Dutch airport Schiphol. And we have set the dates. Hugo, correct me if I'm wrong. I think June 24 until June 28. We have now 50 places available. We only had 25 places available in 2022, so we can host more people. And I'm sure we'll pass it and share it with the Discourse Consortium once we have a better view on the program. Hugo is working hard on that, and I think he would be the key person to ask for information. I really hope that I can welcome there several persons from the Discourse Consortium.
Yes, indeed. So coming information about the Lawrence workshop will follow next year. As Dr. Sommer said, we are really at just the stage of organizing it. Maybe like 70% of the slots have been already assigned to partners of the trusting project. But as Dr. Sommer said, there are still maybe, I don't know, 20 or 15 places available. So sure, we will reach out in the future when we have further details. about the Lawrence workshop. And well, this is actually our last slide. And here we are sharing with you some of the research questions coming back to the consensus paper. These are some of the research questions that we raised there. Again, these are by no means all the research questions, and you might even, if you will, like to debate whether these are the most important research questions. But the point is, these are some of the questions we highlighted in our consensus paper. And I think this might be interesting for us to discuss. So for now, I will just read them a bit out loud. And if any of you would like to address one of these during the discussion, would be great. Or if you would like to bring, of course, other research questions, I can just link them. But some of the ideas are here. So, for instance, we were wondering whether there might be transdiagnostic and or pathognomonic early warning NLP markers. So here the doubt was whether, for instance, we could develop NLP markers that might be useful to recognize, for instance, early warning signs for different psychiatric conditions, or whether there might actually be a specific marker for specific diseases. And for instance, going to the third question, we're also wondering whether these early warning NLP markers might manifest similarly across the lifespan. So imagine you have developed an NLP marker for psychosis. So here the question is, would this NLP marker for psychosis might be useful for different populations, say youths and 40 years old adults. Another question that we made was, what predictive value will these NLP markers we are trying to develop might have in the case of non-help seeking samples? This actually, I think clinicians might be better qualified than myself to elaborate, but simply stated is that, can we use these NLP markers similarly in both cases, so for non-help seeking and help seeking samples of individuals? We also were wondering, for instance, which NLP markers might best predict outcomes such as social functioning or symptoms remission or vocational recovery, or whether these NLP markers might assist in the identification of the optimal treatment for a given patient. And again, this is just a handful of questions. And again, if any of you would like to address a particular question, I think we can come back to it. Otherwise, at least from our part, this is what we would like to share with you. We would like to thank you for your attention, and we are, of course, looking forward to discuss with you. So for now, I will stop sharing so I can see you.
Thank you so much. What a great update about everything that's been going on and all of our shared goals. I think we'll open it up to questions right now if anybody has wants to raise their hand or enter anything into the chat. I also just wanted to mention, excuse me, I was at ACNP just recently at the American College of Neuropsychopharmacology, and there was a great session about all the work that's been done in psychosis in general, in terms of measurement and biomarkers. I think Deanna Barch was there, and Steve Martyr, and many of the well-known figures in this area. And actually, Gina Cooperberg was attending alongside me, and we asked a bit about, hey, we're working in language, and we asked the panel what they thought, what their advice would be based on their work in cognition and schizophrenia in general, and they said that we should pay attention to internationalism, cross-cultural factors. We should try to come up with a protocol that could be used in common, and to come up with like ways of analyzing that. And I was very happy in being able to be like, okay, check. So I just wanted to share that with the group. Okay, yes, Iris, Iris, I'm sorry, yeah.
Yes, thanks, Sunny. I saw your picture at ACMP, and thanks for sharing your experience. It's a great meeting. Yeah, regarding Hugo's list of the possible applications, I think forensic psychiatry could benefit preferably regarding the non-help seeking population. So usually if a person is non-help seeking, then it's none of our business, then we're somehow really not allowed to even intervene or even record his or her speech or analyze it. Although it is done, of course, often from social media platforms and things like that. But I don't think that's the way to go. But forensics is an exception. So in forensic psychiatry, there often is a coercive need to examine patients that may be psychotic. And without their collaboration, speech analysis can have a very important role in that people may not be willing to talk about their personal circumstances, not their symptoms, may not be willing to answer questions tapping into delusions or hallucinations, but they may be willing to, for example, discuss what they would like to eat tomorrow, or what other needs that they might benefit from. So usually that type of discussion is possible. And actually recording such discussions may help and may add to our risk assessment if a person has or has not psychotic symptoms. So I definitely see good opportunities in that field.
I agree, Iris. This is Jean-Pierre Lindelmeyer from New York. Even in non-forensic samples, we have many patients where we do language recordings who are unaware of their mental illness and deny that they're actually sick. However, they're quite willing to give us speech samples and to describe, various responses to our questions. So it will be very, very valuable, I think, to see, is there a distinction in the speech patterns between patients who have insight versus patients who do not have insight? Because as you probably know, not having insight is a major, major issue, in schizophrenia treatment, and particularly in the clinical sphere. So this is something we would really want to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both. And Amelie?
Yes, sorry, my voice is not cooperating super well. But first, I want to thank Hugo, Iris, and Lena for making us think about those topics. One aspect that I think we should also be thinking about, especially given that language is meant for communication. So when language is affected, it's likely to affect social interactions, and more specifically verbal interactions with other people. And I think we often forget that aspect when we focus on markers. like in the sense that, like, for me, something that's of great interest is to try to understand what aspects of language make it harder when you interact with other people. So like you could be unclear and still do well with others, but you could have some specificity about your language productions that like affect more your social interactions. And like, yes, like it's super important to characterize like who's like at risk for like psychosis, who's at risk for relapse. Like I totally agree. But like who's at risk for poor social interactions and then for poor social functioning, and like what, like how can we address that, I think is also a very important question that like I just like wanted to raise as well, that so that like it's like so my goal for like this decades to like always bring that back, like the idea of like how can we help patients like get better social interactions with others.
Yeah. Oh, no, sorry, please go ahead, Dr. Lena.
Oh, just a brief point, really. Thanks, Hugo, for. I just wanted to follow up on Emily's thought on social dysfunction being an important outcome that we can look at using language. In fact, that reminded me of a very brief interaction I had with a person who was trying to help early intervention clinics where I used to work a few years ago. So we had we have a lot of interactions with local companies and businesses to give jobs to patients who go through early intervention clinics. And one such occasion when I was talking to a local business owner, was a very frank conversation, and I was asking them, what is the challenge our patients have when they come for your interview? Why don't they get jobs at your firm? And this is a person who has a family knowledge of mental health problems. They had personal and family experience. And they very frankly said, and it really struck a chord with me, they said that it's not that patients with psychosis come to interviews and hallucinate or say something which is like delusional quality. That's not why we find it difficult to identify them as a suitable employee. It's the way that our patients interact sometimes when they're very unwell, the way that they say things, the oddities in speech, the oddities in verbal behavior is what really makes our patients often not so employable compared to other people. So it really struck, how we understand language, how we treat and rectify some of this verbal behaviors. That's going to be key for restoring social function in our patients. Yeah. So thanks for bringing that up, Amelie. It's an important point.
Yeah. So it's not only how people, like how the language comes out of the patients, is how it comes into other people and how it affects others. Like, so like if we see it in an interactive manner.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, if I may, that's what I wanted to say, that it's both ways, right? So if we just focus on the characteristics of the speakers or people who are communicating and who might have received a diagnosis, but we don't pay attention to the way all this information is perceived or received by the other listener speaker, then we are just looking at one side of the coin, sort of say. And actually, I'm not really aware, but I might just be ignorant about it. But I'm actually not really aware about research on this other side of the coin. So, like, for instance, how do other patients or I don't know, even clinicians or family members respond or try to adapt when these difficulties in communications occur? Like, I mean, I can imagine this in other situations, for instance, with my daughter. So sometimes she struggles, right, to say something. And then if I just pretend to just be blind to it or don't help her, then of course communication will simply break, will just reach no further going point. But if I adapt and try to give her something to handle, then she can communicate. And I'm not aware of that kind of research with, with people who are communicating with individuals with this disorder. So it would be really interesting if any of you know about that to share.
Yeah, Emily, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that like in my team, we've done like, we have two different studies that replicated pretty much the same results. It's like an interactive task that patients do with an interaction partner. and we have LT controls that do the same task with an interaction partner. And like what we did is that we then asked not the interaction partner was also always a research assistant who was aware of who was a patient or not, but we then had other people who were blind to the group listen to all the audio tracks and try to do the interactive task while listening to the patient's instructions or the LT controls instructions. And like in both studies with two different versions of the same task, but two different tasks, like we saw that patient, like it was judged without knowing who's a patient and who's not, that the patients made it harder to do the task based on their verbal instructions. And in both studies, this like making it harder was linked to theory of mind, to social cognition. So people with less good social cognition, patient with less good social cognition abilities, made it harder for other people to do the task with them. And one other result that like was super important, I think, in those studies is that we also had people rate how interesting the stories were, because like the task was like to tell a story so the other person can place the cards in order. And in both studies, how interesting was like linked with like correlation, like super high correlations, linked with how expressive the patients were. So on the one side, you have how easy they make it for others. That's linked to theory of mind. And on the other side, you have how like interesting they seem. That's very linked to their expressivity and their voice. And the results were like very similar in the two studies with two different groups. And like so one of that, the first study is published. The second one we're writing it right now. But that's what I submitted as like a presentation to talk about like the two studies for a series.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. And I think that it's been, you and others have brought up before that perhaps we want to consider incorporating an interactive task, like a dialogue, into the protocol as well. So I think we should keep thinking about that. Keep prioritizing that.
Yeah.
That was actually
like I think like beyond dialogue, the doing something together, so like trying to achieve a goal together, not just talking for the sake of like speaking or getting to know each other, but having something to accomplish, you know, that you can determine, did you accomplish what you were meant to accomplish?
Yeah, very much. I think that was also one of the other insights that, you know, was shared at the ACMP meeting from the developers of the Matrix, was that they really wished that they had a process in place for updating the instrument that they'd come up with. So maybe we should learn from that for what we do. And I think, I don't know if Chiara is aware of it, but I think Valentina also had worked on pragmatic oriented therapy to actually treat people with schizophrenia, right? And there was some preliminary evidence that they were able to modify the kinds of like impairments that we're talking about. I just read a paper. I don't know if someone here knows more about it than I do.
Yes, I'm aware of it, but really not in the position of explaining into the detail. But I was very much impressed by the comment of Professor Hakim, because yes, it resonated with the Valentina's work very much. So yeah.
Okay, so Kasavi.
Hi, everyone. It's a very interesting conversations discussion. Again, I'm not fully versed in this world of schizophrenia yet, but hopefully I get to dwell on it soon. I guess I had a question more about just like the language banks itself, because I know there's a Quebecois bank. I'm assuming there's one for English as well, or Anglophones. But like, is there a way to kind of skip that step of like having a model that can be generalized to all languages? Because with, I guess something I've learned again through Dr. Palaniyappan is that the common people that kind of develop schizophrenia are people that have immigrated to a new country. They experience a lot of high level of stress, and then education level may not be the highest. And so with that, how do we generalize these models so that in different countries that there's that language barrier? And again, this is a great tool, especially with the cost portion of it, where a clinician could better diagnose them without having to do an MR scan or whatnot. So I guess I want to know how to go about that, or if you have any thoughts on it.
Yeah, I actually think Dr. Sommer might, if she would like to, elaborate on this because to some extent, yeah, that's what actually she's looking at with the trusting. So Dr. Sommer, would you like to elaborate on generalizability of these NLP markers that are being developed?
Yeah, well, I can only add that we're looking into that. I cannot yet share results because we don't have them yet, but it's certainly one of our aims, and I hope in maybe a year from now that we can answer that question.
Yeah, and what I can also add is that because I'm also really fortunate to be to some extent involved in the trusting project. So what we are already figuring out is that even from the most, we might say, I don't know if basic is the correct word, but initial, maybe initial is a better word. Since the really more initial steps, things can really have an impact on these NLP markers that we are developing. So for instance, concretely, we are now looking at pre-processing steps. So what are we doing to the, for instance, transcript we have? And without going too deep into that, we have realized that even at that point, what you do can really influence what you obtain. So generalizing something, it's not only generalizing across languages. I mean, it should even start, for instance, generalizing the pre-processing step, generalizing the model you choose, generalizing the way you calculate, generalizing the way you obtain the data, and generalizing and reaching a consensus of that is just so hard. It's just so hard. But yeah, as Dr. Sommer said, is what the trusting team is looking into right now.
Thank you. And Tuche?
I mean, Lena, I think try to add this
Oh, sorry.
conversation.
I'll go after you and Albert. That's okay. I can.
I'm sorry.
Okay. In fact, mine is just a comment. I just want to add something to just social part or communication part impact. In fact, to Emily's comment, like even when we come back to the history of language in schizophrenia, every time there is a common consensus, like the most damaged part, both in micro and more broader part, I mean, like mostly pragmatics, discourse, and prosody. In fact, when we check this part, all these parts are already related with social aspects. In fact, it's not like a phoneme. It's not like a simple syntax. I mean, this most damaged part is already related to social parts. Like sometimes, think about prosody. You need to arrange yourself depending on the response or depending on the questions, or you need to aware yourself, much more higher aspects of cognition or language faculty, or as a sub-part of cognition, as a language, I mean, or pragmatics already, or, these part, think about Gricean maxims, for instance, in a simple dialogue. All is related to language and depending on conversation and even theory of mind aspect. For instance, it's all really important in a conversation and communication, for instance. And communication in a broader sense, even when I taking data, I realize eye contact even is somehow problematic, for instance, which is, important part in communication, even babies. Like eye contact is problematic, gestures are problematic. Even we can add these parts, even all the symbols, simply, depending on conversation part and communication part, except from micro-linguistic areas and biomarkers in natural language processing. That is why I believe these comments in social aspect, even simple correlation with social cognition test can give really good cues about in language and communication, I believe. That is why it's so valuable, I think.
I wonder, that almost makes me think that in addition to having a shared, language assessment protocol, if we should also have recommendations or, try to have some common ground in assessing social functioning, social processing, and
Yes.
other kind of related metadata or clinical data that could be interesting to evaluate alongside the language.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then just before Alban, I think Rosa had put in a couple of comments into the chat. Rosa, I don't know if you wanted to say them yourselves or if you'd like for me to read. Okay, I'll take that as, oh, okay.
Sorry, I think my connection is not very good. So if you can read the questions.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, no problem. I think Rosa says congratulations on
the is one day in Spain. This is the reason.
I'm sorry?
There is not working day in Spain.
Oh,
and I'm at home.
Okay, yeah, sure, no problem. Don't worry about it. I'm happy to read these out. So Rosa said congratulations. She found particularly relevant the consensus issues concerning international and national legislation that were brought up, I think, in some of Hugo's slides. Do you think a common data sharing agreement would be possible? That sounds nice, but I feel somehow pessimistic personally. I don't know, Lena, Iris, and Hugo, if you have thoughts about that.
Well, every country has its own legal issues. Within the EU, that would work. Within the VS, certainly. But for example, already including even Turkey, which is very close to Europe, poses a huge problem. So for every country that does not have these data transfer agreements, appointments, yeah, you have to find a new way. So I don't think that we can make it at the global level yet, unfortunately. Would love to, though.
But I concur with that, and Brian is here. Brian can add some thoughts as well if he's still here, Brian McWinney. But this is not a trivial issue, and we've been thinking as a group for a while. Basically, I think everyone is interested in open science, and in Canada especially, we lead lots of big open science projects here in neuroscience, and it's part of the culture of doing research in certain places. But open science is not open in the same way to every country and every legislation. There are different interpretations. Before even we go into the detail, I think the question we have to ask is, what level of data sharing do we really need to answer the questions that we are interested in? There's quite a lot that could be done with the meta level of data sharing, and this is what one of our efforts is directed towards. Sunny is collecting all this metadata as well for us to see what we can do without actually getting hands at clinical raw data. I will leave it at that. I mean, I don't think there's one solution, common data sharing agreement, but I don't think that is necessarily the biggest hurdle that we face. There are many, many things we can do without having a common data sharing agreement.
Yeah. Thanks, Lena. And I feel like even if there were a common US agreement, my institution would want to make some stuff up and be creative themselves as well. So yeah. Alban?
His comments regarding how do you compare people with different backgrounds, different cultural settings, language problems like second languages, something like that. Personally, I feel like the most valuable source of solving this, or the most valuable pathway to solving is to have, as Lena already pointed towards, having a baseline you can trust for someone. So if you know that at a certain point people are either very ill and then you get less, or they are very healthy, and if it gets worse from there, you know that something has changed. And that basically means a slight step away from just doing cross-sectional studies where you have patients controls and you measure them once. So if you have, but yeah, then you can compare someone to themselves and see the changes there. And there might be confounders still present there. So for example, say you have someone who's very young or still developing, so you would have normal language development, so there would be a change over time. And you would measure that instead of having psychotic symptoms present or decreasing. But the other way around is also, it would make all of these confounders, it would basically remove them, in my opinion. Problem is, it's not applicable for everything. So if you have someone who's, for example, at clinical high risk and you want to predict something and you only have one measurement, you don't have like a valid baseline, so to say, to compare someone with. And if we look at some specific of the questions that are also raised in the consensus paper, like you might have only access to limited data or only data where you're not really sure about the state of how someone is normally or how they should behave normally. But I do think in that type of corner edge there, we can do some more longitudinal measurements.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, no, please go ahead, Sonny.
I just want to go back to the point I had in mind. This is the one that was initiated by Kesavi's question. So just to follow up on the Kesavi's question was about generalizability. Should we aim for a model that generalizes across all the settings, given how people move in different countries and different languages? Now, I also want to think how important generalizability is for something like what we want to achieve, because without critical thinking, we take it for granted all models should be generalizable. But I want to challenge that gently. I think we had a talk with from Vizar Berisha. Some of you were here last year when Vizar gave a talk, and he brought this point up, and it's worth reminding everyone the importance of that. Generalizability is the holy grail we don't need in some sense, because take, for example, what we want to do with this speech-based measurements. We want some instrument to come out of it. The instrument helps clinical practice. Now, you can think of instruments of two types. You can have an instrument like a weighing machine, which behaves the same way in every clinic. Or you can have an instrument that is a clinician who easily adapts to a new clinic, new hospital, or a new place that they have to work. They immediately learn what the routines are, what kind of patient they see. So on one end, you have a very highly adaptable instrument, humans, and the other end, you have kind of fixed instruments that are generalizable very much. I think most of our machine learning models, especially the ones we are going to build with speech, are going to be in between these two. Because they're going to be in between, what is important for us is really to understand the assumptions under which they work, rather than making them generalizable completely. In other ways, we have to know if they're showing low weight for the same person in two different places. In one place, you're only 80 kilograms. In another place, you're 55 kilograms. Why is it happening? Those assumptions is what we really need to clarify with the tools that we're preparing. I don't think we will ever have a single tool that cuts across all languages and predicts relapse or suicidality or anything that we're aiming for. And that chasing that is probably a futile effort, in my opinion. I mean, people may have completely different opinions on this.
Well, in some ways, it's actually contrary to the whole goal of personalized medicine, right? Because the whole point of being able to do these like scalable, detailed assessments for individuals is that we might be able to predict for individuals and be able to take into their kind of social, cultural, and even personal idiosyncrasies to be able to come up with clinically meaningful insights.
Yeah, at this point, and I'm just really happy I listened to a presentation kind of to some extent related to this yesterday, so that is so fresh in my mind. And it's not because I'm an expert on that or anything, but yesterday I was listening to a presentation about statistical models for intensive longitudinal data. And so the speaker was saying that what they are trying now to develop are models that on the one hand can really account for within individual differences, and on the other also account for the between individual differences. And then the presenter said that, for instance, if you want to try to differentiate, let's say, between patients and non-patients, then you can look, of course, at the between individual differences and think about such in a way such as latent classes. But for that, you need to think about it in a discrete way. So in a way, think, okay, these are really different populations, and I can really see differences in the trends, let's say, of the symptoms or speech. And then if you really want to predict for an individual within each of these different populations something as relapse, then you need to understand which is the mean. So not only how is the baseline, but how is the mean way of speak, let's say, of that person, and then also know the dynamics, so that you are able to predict anything. But what at the moment she was saying that, in my mind, because she was using terms such as traits and state. So she said the average of an individual might be seen as the trait, and then the changes can be seen as the dynamics can be seen as the states. But in the way she was saying this, it made me feel that she was reflecting on it, assuming that the trait is the thing that is stable, and then you go through changes. But then at that moment, I thought, I'm just wondering here, I'm just brainstorming. But then at that moment, I thought, but what if we think about it in the other way? So like you are in this continuous flow of states, and then you reach this kind of trait-like moment in which you are in the relapse, and then you move away. So like looking at it in the other way around. I'm just saying this because in my mind, it's something that I cannot easily disentangle when I read about these models or the assumptions, like the statistical assumptions or the linguistic assumptions, or assumptions in other dimensions. I just wanted to bring it up because it's still fresh in my mind, and maybe others might have other ways like to think about it. Yeah, that's what I wanted to share.
I was thinking about the issue of generalizability still, and I was thinking that the implication would be that what if a model only works in 1 or 2 languages? So I think it's important to keep that in mind also because of this. So it would be nice to not leave everyone beyond in general, but also because it can inform us about, for example, linguistic measures that based on certain cultural norms or beliefs may work in a language or in another. So it would still be informative also from a psychiatric perspective, I think, to know that. So maybe we should not expect that the same NLP markers is gonna have the same confidence interval or have the same range in a language compared to the other, but maybe we can look at the correlation, still look at it at the correlation with the symptoms, with the functioning, and explore it from cultural perspectives, different cultural perspectives.
Good point. All right, and I think this is the best timed session we've had in a while because we're wrapping up exactly on time. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. I want to make a plug for people to please volunteer to, maybe co-host or run some of the sessions next year, whether early career investigators or others who want to be involved in hosting some of these seminars. We're also looking for proposals in terms of talks that any of you might want to share with the group, or others in the field that you think would be relevant for our group here. Amelie, you had a point?
Just to say that I gave my name to present a while ago, and then it went to other people who were part of the one edition of the journal. But I would still be up to presenting eventually.
Let's definitely work you in then for this coming year. I think we had the special issue themed
it was a
lecture.
special issue of the journal group, so that's why it fell back, but I'm still up to it eventually.
Perfect. Yeah, no, for next year for sure. I think we'll definitely plan for that. And then if anybody else wants to reach out, if anybody's willing to host some of them or would like to host some of them, please let me know. And it would be great to get some more involvement there. Yes, Thank you. And I see there's a comment from Lena that he agrees with Sylvia.
Yeah. Thanks everyone, and happy holidays.
Yes. Happy
Yeah.
holidays.
Thanks everyone.
Thank
It
you.
was great.
Happy holidays.
See you next
Bye-bye.
year. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.